Hello, guys, and welcome to another episode of the MSC Performance Podcast with me, Mark Wilson, and Sonia Fukova. Hope you're all well. We're excited to be back. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see we're donning the latest MSC stash, which will be available for members to purchase. It's not really cold in the office. We're just wearing all the layers because we want to show off the new stash. So you see my little beanie here. Sonia's got a little head ear warmer thing. Gilets are on, and we're looking sharp. I might take it off because it's a little bit hot in here now, but I'll keep it on for as long as I can. People listening on Spotify won't have a clue what we're on about, but we're wearing loads of new stash. Exciting day at MSC. So we've got basically just had a massive order of stash delivered to sell to members. So we've got MSC joggers, got MSC jumpers, we've got MSC hoodies, we've got MSC snoods. We're not wearing a snood. We should have shown a snood off. I will show you a snood next time. We've got hats, we've got these ear warmer things.
And we are very excited about all this.
Fully stocked. Yeah, we've always had people wanting MSC stash, and we've always done bits and pieces, but we're really going for it now and offering a lot of different options. I'm even wearing MSC joggers here, but
leave it to the ground. Leave it.
MSC joggers, give the people what they want. Anyway, moving on. Very exciting times at MSC lately. Classes have been mega busy. We had 30 in for Metcon in total this morning, over 2 classes, which was mega. Evenings have been ticking up really well with the Metcons. Barbell club guys into their intensity phase.
We like to see that post-summer people still march forward.
We march. It's such an important time as well, I think, because December can be a bit of a write-off for a lot of people. Even the most hardcore trainers. I mean, Max normally disappears for about 6 weeks over Christmas. We don't see much of him. And some of our members do too, because there's lots going on. It's a nice time of year, Christmas parties and whatnot. So cash your chips in October, November. Get the work in, and it's nice and mild at the moment. It's just a great time to be training, and MSC's buzzing at the moment, absolutely buzzing.
Yeah, we're doing great.
How are those barbell club guys getting on, Sonia?
I'm really proud of all of them. Obviously, we have it nicely split into some more hypertrophy work for those who kind of been on and off, or for some people who started lately, and then those guys who's been kind of sticking with us for a while. They are on the intensity block. This week we've moved to week 3, and they are peaking with their doubles. Next week is the week 4 of the block. So we go in towards their 8 to 9 RPEs. So we're looking for the big doubles, and I think everyone's been enjoying it a lot, because obviously we've done a lot of volume work, good prep, and the numbers are just unreal. I mean, it's so good to watch how they progressing on a weekly basis. I'm just so proud of all of them. The feedback's been great. Just chipping in. So great work for that, guys. Atmosphere's been great. Evenings, mornings. Shout out to mornings, which picked up. The little club is going well.
It's great. What I get a lot of is people asking me, guys at rugby and stuff will say, bloody hell, how's that person lifting that amount or whatever? And it's the work that goes behind it. Like you spoke about, this week is big double. So it's, we're really demonstrating the strength, but the strength is really built with the volume work and setting the foundations. And you say, this is week, we're into week 10, week 11, around
of the big one,
of the big cycle. So it's we've had 8-9 weeks of building good, solid, honest work, and now it starts to get a little bit sexier, some heavier weights, some lower reps, and we can sort of show off that.
I think they're really enjoying the bodybuilding in this block.
Exactly. Yeah. There's
Very
a
good
little
feedback
bit
on that.
of
Obviously,
kind of
with the
isolation
focus
work.
on the main lifts.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, everything's all going well at MSC. Today's podcast, we want to expand a little bit on what we were talking about last week. In regards to conditioning. So last week we were talking about, obviously we did a big piece on independent gyms versus commercial gyms. So if you haven't checked it out, track back and give that a listen. And then we went into the importance of conditioning. That was the aim of it, and why it's important and why we need to do it. Today's going to be just a little bit more in depth regarding conditioning. A little bit of chat about like time zones we can kind of work in, considerations for getting quicker, considerations for getting fitter aerobically. And we're not going to go like full, depth on in regards to sports science. We're going to try and make it like, digestible for people. But like it will be like just a little notch up from last week's chat, really. So yeah, I mean, kind of moving into that, with conditioning, there's lots of factors to think about. For those who didn't catch the podcast last week, when we're talking about conditioning, we're talking about developing the energy systems specific to whatever it is that we are competing in or want to get better at. So we have lots of different energy systems. We have the lactate system, which is where we're working for a very, very short period of time. We're working explosively. We have, lactate development. We have anaerobic work. We have aerobic work, and within that, there's lots of different intensities in which we can work at. So most people would want to develop all the energy systems, really. You want to, like, if you're not competing in a sport, you want to be obviously as fit and as healthy as possible. You want to build your aerobic base so that you've got, you're healthy, your heart and lungs, are healthy, they're efficient, and, you have the stamina, if you like, to undergo, activities, from day to day, to doing more extravagant, things and hikes and walks and, looking after, kids and family and whatever, without being sort of massively out of breath, as a simple way of putting it, right through to, bringing it right back to like speed work, where, we want to be quick and explosive. Now, it might not sound as necessary for the everyday person, but, for me, if you're not training for a specific sport, you want to train to be as hard to kill as possible. You just want to be as much of an amazing athlete as possible.
A lot of people do, like, they kind of like to run marathons or half marathons. Like, a lot of people are into this like long distance running. And what I've noticed is that, like, our members, or I've came across people who've been doing this and now they're looking for being a bit more explosive, like change of direction.
Yeah.
That's why they kind of looking for the type of like Metcon. So that will be probably one of the benefits, just like
fast,
change maybe
muscular, explosive
type of training you do. Yeah.
For sure. Absolutely. And, like hard aerobic training, like, specifically doing like back-to-back marathons, like ultra endurance stuff, takes its toll on the body. If you're looking at like body composition and things like that you want to improve, and just like generally being as healthy as possible, there are better ways to do it than like hard aerobic work, for sure, because it takes a lot of toll on the body. And it's if we're running, for example, like multiple times a week, high mileage, it can be very stressful on the joints, and also hormonally have some effects as well, which might go into in another podcast. But so say a little bit of chat about that today, and we'll link in some to athletes as well. So I think the first thing to probably talk about is like, when people are trying to get fitter, is it better to run? Is it better to get on the bike? Is it better to do like, conditioning classes and things like that? Would you have anything to say to those people?
Yeah, I think like, I think people might be put off or scared to join a class, if we're talking classes, let's say, that they are not fit enough, which obviously could be the case. That's why it's good if you probably like observe or, you know, do your research, what the class kind of, what is it based on, what do people do there, and then I think like you need to try and see and obviously get a good bit of advice. Let's say we welcome all abilities, so you don't necessarily have to come in and be super fit for the class. You can be a complete beginner, and we know what we're gonna get you there, because that's why I think class is a good thing to start with, because some people would just go for a run, but we know how probably it ends up, right? Like you start, you know, 5 minutes in, if 5 minutes in, and then you probably walk home.
Yeah.
Like the run is just, if you're not a runner, or if you haven't run before, like it's not easy, right? Sure. You don't know how to pace yourself, you don't know how far you want to go, how to kind of split the effort through the run, as you don't understand maybe like, is it sprint, am I gonna go a bit further, then maybe you need 5k and then you can walk for a couple of days after. So my thoughts on this is probably that like, know your starting point, where you kind of stand, because if you even gonna join or sign up for a like high intensity class somewhere, like you might not necessarily enjoy it, or you know, do that well as you would like. It might put you off at some point as well, because obviously if you're not trained for that type of intensity, it's just not going to work out well. Like you need to work your base towards it. So like I personally think that like everyone should start like with the it's hard to split it, but like developing aerobic base first, so you are actually okay to recover, and you know how to kind of split effort and then building towards the high intensity later.
Yeah, for sure. Like I think when you're doing like, when you know, if you take sprinting for example, like sprinting
I can't hear you.
Warm, isn't it? It's gonna be warm. Like sprinting for example is gonna like is very high forces that you're producing, so like if you haven't got the strength, if you haven't got the muscular strength,
that's another base,
you know, to handle that kind of impact. Like if you're a 100 kilo guy for example and you're doing like a 30 meter flat out sprint, that's like a lot of force going through the joints and impact. So like the risk of injury is quite high. So like that's another reason.
Yeah, again, knowing your base, like you can't just go into like as you said, like flat out sprints with zero strength training before. So all these things kind of like overlap. So again, if you want to get faster, yes, sprint. That's great. Run. If you want to get better at the running, probably you should run. But all these things like strength training, that all prevent the injuries, which you're more prone to get. Because obviously we talked about this a couple of times, that sprinting is probably the hardest type of training, with the forces and the demands on the body.
Yeah.
So knowing your base would be probably a key thing. Where do I stand? How much can I take on? Can I go and do an hour session of sprints? When we used to do our sprints a year back in lockdown, I'm thinking like, how long did we used to do it for? Around 45 minutes, 60. And it was taking its thing on me. Like I definitely can tell.
And that might only be like 6 to 10 sets.
Yeah. This way we can nicely kind of talk about the recovery period. And
absolutely. So specifically talking about alactate work then. So like, you know, if we're being very specific, like alactate technically is, you know, is recorded, you know, normally is under, you know, anything under 6 seconds essentially, but like normally alactate, you can kind of, for most people who have maybe less power, they're not absolute elite, you can probably stretch to like 8 to 10 seconds. So let's say sub 10 seconds work. So we're talking about sprints, we're talking about jumps, we're talking about like real explosive work. So I wanted to, like, with this podcast, kind of link into athletes quite a lot. So like I mentioned it last week with field athletes, for example, like 95% of field sports are alactate and aerobic focused. There's not a great deal of middle ground with like pure lactate work, where like in lactate work, you might be working like, 60 to 90 seconds at like absolute maximum effort. There might not be too many of those times. There will be some, so it's worth training to an extent, but not a lot. But like, it's, let's say energy system wise, it is like, sprint walk, or sprint jog, etc., etc. So the alactate system is a very important energy system to develop for field athletes, and as we mentioned earlier, useful for absolutely anyone. In our metcons will work on quite a lot, to be fair, of alactate work, because it can build some good muscular development, some good power, and make you look nice and lean.
I just want to add to this, because you're talking about field athletes and then we kind of talking about metcons, so like you kind of need to search for each sport or individual sport what the requirement is. But I think when you say in field, it kind of nicely summarize like everything, like rugby, football, etc. But then obviously if we're talking about like powerlifters, or if you do weightlifting, like it's always almost the overlap. Like it's not only one energy system. Like you need to develop them all.
For sure.
And then you might just have a little bit of priority.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and it's exactly the same when we do our like weight training and strength training. Like you want to focus on one. Like we spoke about it, I think before, like with powerlifters, for example, like the average work is a few seconds. With Olympic lifting, it's even less. But does that mean that we want to completely neglect the aerobic system? Because you might say that it's not specific, but we would say, well, no, you do want to do aerobic work as well. It just won't be as much. So like an elite weightlifter or powerlifter, doing aerobic work might take up like 2% or 5% of their training, but it's still definitely worth doing, because although the sport isn't 5 minutes long or 7 minutes long, 80 minutes long, it's still beneficial to build the aerobic system so that your training can be a lot better. You can manage weight obviously easier as well. We can do back-to-back lifts if we need to. We can handle a higher training volume, so it's still worth being aerobically fit for all of them. So yeah, I mean, like, you definitely don't want to like separate, too much between like, sports and like, metconners and things like that, because it is all important. I think like what would be a good thing to talk about is just the like how to program for that. If we're talking about like, right, I want to develop my speed, my speed, whatever athlete I am. Now, when you're trying to develop the alactate system, you're trying to become faster. Basically, what we need to be doing is we need to make sure that the intent is there with your training, so that you're working at very, very high speeds, maximal effort. Now, probably the first thing I want to go into is like the rest periods and things like that, because what you see a lot of is like people trying to do like sprint training, and they're trying to get, when you say, well, what's the goal? And they're saying, well, the goal is to get, faster over 5 meters or 10 meters or, 30 meters. And what they're doing is like, they're doing a sprint, and then like they're resting for like 20 seconds, 30 seconds, if that, and then they're sprinting back again, back and forth. And what's happening there is because because we're doing too much distance, and therefore the fatigue's taking over, the energy system's going from alactate into aerobic, then it's, you're not actually working at a high enough intensity to improve your speed. So, research done decades ago, and sort of promoted by Charlie Francis, was like, you need to be working at 95% plus intensity to actually improve speed. Super hard, like good prep, good rest, good warm up, everything. Like, whereas you're doing like sprint, like 10-20 seconds recovery and then sprinting again, like you're not doing what you're supposed to do. Now, that's not to say that it's not still good training, because like sprint recovery stuff's another thing, but you're not, it's just being careful as to what you're actually training for.
I think when we look into like, I think we just chat about it, Usain Bolt and his training, like when you would look at his training, he would literally show up for doing 8 sets, and that would be all session. But like the effort he works on that session is like
it's maximal effort. Yeah.
So like I remember our sessions like literally couple of sets, but like if you were supposed to work at top speed, it was actually really hard.
Yeah, big time. And a highly demanding session.
Yeah.
Like, we spoke before about like high days and low days, and like sprinting would definitely be in your high day because it's a very high intensity activity that takes a lot of recovery. Even like you say, like doing 8 sets, 10 sets in 45 minutes. It's quite it's quite a lot. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like so, if we're talking like the average person for like to develop sprinting, we might be looking at like 4 or 5 minutes rest between sets. Now this does depend on the distance as well in which you're sprinting, but if you're doing like 30 meters plus at high intensity, then like we need like 4 or 5 minutes at least. At the elite level, the top guys will have longer recovery, so like elite sprinters might have 10 to 20 minutes. Literally, it's like when 10 to 20 minutes. They might do a 60 meter sprint and then it's a 10 to 20 minute rest before they do another set, because there's a big difference between force output between a guy who runs 10 seconds and a guy that runs 15 seconds, for example. So they need even more recovery. I think we could get quite deep into this, so we've got to be a bit careful not to go like too deep with the considerations. But like I think what I would say is like in regards to rest, if you are looking to develop speed, for example, like let's say you are a football player and you want to get faster, then just make sure you are once or twice a week having those sessions that are speed focused. We take away like anything else, we take away like the aerobic side of things, we make sure we get an ample recovery, and we're working at high intensities. I think like alongside the rest, programming considerations is important as well. Like, how do I start from like nothing or from an off season and go into actually getting my speed up, get my sprinting speed up? Now with this, like we spoke about, a few minutes ago, sprinting is very, very high impact on the body. There's a lot of ground forces you're producing. So it's very high impact, high risk of injury if we're not strong enough or if we're not fresh or recovered enough. So what you can do to reduce that risk to begin with is by slowing those sprints down. Now, that might sound contradictory to what we've just said about working at maximum intent, but you're still going to work at maximum intent. But what you're going to do is you're going to add resistance to your sprint or an incline, for example. So if you're coming in like, straight off an off season, or you haven't done any sprinting for a while and you want to get into sprinting, for example, even if you're not an athlete, I'd always recommend starting off working, like when you're doing your sprints, working hard, but working over short distances and working at resistance or hills. So it might be like 5 meters or 10 meters or 15 at an absolute push, like no more than 15 meters. And we would run on a hill, which is naturally going to slow us down a little bit and therefore protect us. Or we can do it flat, but with a weighted sled or something like that, which, separate to this, is a fantastic way of developing power, actually. But like just slowing us down and giving us a natural protective mechanism, if you like. Then you would look at, as a progression, you would look at going from, say, 5 meters 1 week, week 2 to 10 meters, week 3 to 15 meters, let's say on the hill or with the resistance. And then what we can start to do is we can bring back the distance to 5 meters to 10 meters, but start working on the flats. And then we can gradually increase the distance as we go along. So that like by week, depending on who you are, if you're a well-trained athlete, by week 4 or 5 or 6, you could be into full sprints. If you're not a well-trained athlete and you want to get into sprinting, you might be looking at week 8, 10, 12 really before you start doing those kind of like 30, 40, 50, 60 meter sprints.
I think with this, like, you're almost indicating that like it's very individual based. So like having that little individual approach to the program would probably be a little more beneficial. than just maybe following something super generic. Like obviously the generic idea is there, but then as you said, that like someone might be a bit fitter and can already be running longer distances in week 4, whereas someone, it would take a good while to get into that progression.
I think that's a really interesting point, and like kind of, you know, covers the basis of all training really, which is like everybody should, you know, do aerobic work. Everyone should ideally sprint. Everyone should push, pull, you know, carry, squat, hinge, all those kind of things. You know, that's something that everybody should be doing some form of.
Yeah, and then you need a bit more, you need a bit less. Yeah.
In terms of dosage, you know, specificity, patterns, like that's where it becomes like very individual. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, we speak about it a lot. Like with a squat, for example, like everybody should be training some sort of squat pattern. You know, for you as a you know, as a weightlifter, like you would high bar back squat and you would front squat a lot. Like for me as a rugby player, like I could use those movements, but like I could easily focus on belt squat or box squat,
100%
for example,
taking demands off. Yeah.
And someone who's a beginner might focus more on, you know, on goblet squat. So those are the kind of, you know, things that we need to take into consideration in terms of individuality. So like, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think like depending on who you are is where you'd make those little, like, you know, those little individual differences. But the whole picture is everybody should be doing bits and pieces of that. So moving probably away from sprint work, I think. Move on. So like we've also got lactate development, which is like, you know, sometimes you know, popular chat, especially in like, you know, rugby circles and things like that. And like you see American football teams training like lactate a lot, which always, you know, I always find a little bit counterproductive. Because the average, I find it counterproductive in American football because the average play in the NFL has been recorded as 4 seconds long.
Okay.
So like it's a very alactate sport. It's again alactate aerobic, but very highly alactate, more so than rugby. Like with rugby, you have to attack and defend. With football, you have to attack and defend whatever position you are. The game's continuous or more continuous than American football. With American football, it's like, you know, 4 or 5 second play, stop. 4 or 5 second play,
that they
stop.
Focus on it maybe too much.
Yeah, like the whole like beasting and like also like maximal aerobic work, which you'll get into in a bit. But like, yeah, like doing like, you know, sort of 60 to 120 seconds, like absolute like max out efforts, like have a place, but like less than 1%. In American football, that should be your training. And for like rugby and football, like that could take up like 5% of your conditioning, I'd say. You know, possibly a little bit higher in an off season, like you could do 10 to 15% lactate specific training.
Makes sense completely what you're saying, but then it's interesting that then they still focus on it. No?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The reason I think is because I think like coaches want to see players suffer, and I mean that by like they're not being horrible, but like they want to, and you see it in like, you know, poor gyms and poor PTs as well. They want to see the clients suffer and sweat, because like I think naturally that makes us think, well, oh, the boys have had a beasting, like they've had a good session, they've had a good workout, and like, you know, we know from a PT point of view, like, you know, you see those coaches who just give like, you know, burpees for an hour, like up and down, like loads of, you know, stupid stuff that doesn't actually develop the person or the athlete. And you see that a lot in field sports as well, where it's like, right, we're gonna, you know, do this absolute beasting. But yeah, so I think it's like it's kind of psychological for the coaches to make them feel like
I don't like it. I'm really shocked now. Like I'm really
no, it's not like, I mean, it's you know, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen at our club a lot, but like it happens at clubs for sure. But like those kind of like lactate bursts and stuff. But like obviously, like having a good lactate buffer is like is good. And for some sports, it is like absolutely essential and will take up a lot of your training. Like if you're a 400-meter runner or an 800-meter runner, like that middle distance running is like highly lactate. It's like maybe the toughest sports or up there, I think. Like I think it's like one of the hardest sports, being like a 400-meter runner is like brutal. So lactate work would take up more of your training. If you're like an everyday gym goer and like you're just training to be good, like you're not playing any sports and stuff, you can add a little bit in, because like it builds up mental toughness. It's like hard, like hard, and you get good
that we should
adaptation.
answer this, that like why an everyday person should train at this or like a lactate or at these intensities. Like when we're talking about how important is it in field sports and in sports for athletes, maybe we should touch a little bit on it. And you started well, like
so like I think for those guys like lactate, so again we could be talking depending on the person, because everyone's energy system is slightly different, but like let's say 30 seconds to 2 minutes, like absolutely flat out, with recovery. Now again, with the recovery, if you're looking at developing the lactate system, you want to have that 30 to 120 second work burst, but then you actually want to be having about 8 to 10 minutes rest afterwards.
But
you're
like, able to work
if you're
harder.
if you're doing like lactate like that, but you're only then having like 30 seconds rest and then trying again, it becomes aerobic because you can't work at the intensity. So similar rules to sprinting. Like if we really want to develop that system, we need longer recovery periods. If we reduce the recovery periods, it becomes aerobic, which again is fine, but it's a different thing you're training.
Then obviously the fitter you get, like the harder you can train, like you can like work harder at like longer duration, and this is basically how you develop into fitness, like in a bigger picture.
100%. I think like again, for the everyday person, like once you were absolutely spot on, like when you saying about like building an aerobic base first is like absolute key, but like 6 months down the line, like once or even less, like when a good aerobic base has been built, like throw in a little bit of lactate into your training, like lactate training, because it's bloody tough and you get a good adaptation from it, you get fit from it. But what you've got to consider is that like it's very hard work, and it can the recovery, not everyone, like you've got to be a special sort of like person to enjoy it, pushing yourself. So like if we're talking true lactate, you have to be powerful enough and like mad enough to push to those boundaries, or else it is again just aerobic.
Because obviously it's a lot of stress.
It's maximal. It's maximal. It's uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. But it's maximal. So like,
and because you're adapting, you just need more and more.
Exactly. I
just literally think from the point of like people I come across and what they say, that like like you do a bit hard session with them and they're like why would you do this to yourself? It's brutal. As you say, like it's not for everyone, because
it is character building.
It's character building, and it pushes you. And some people actually then do get into it because they see how they get better each week or month or whatever it is. Like if we're talking 100-meter sprint on the rowing machine, let's say, that's a bit of a blast. Like it takes longer obviously than 10 seconds, but it's a hard effort through that period, and then you see how you're getting better and better, so you can row the distance faster. And I think this is something what they find, like, oh, actually I'm getting better, and they want to get better, so they will put themselves again through that pain. If I just take it as an example, like obviously that's maybe longer, like probably the best time we had in the gym was like 13-14 seconds for the 100 meters. So if we talk 6-second peak power, like this is the cheeky one we do with our members. Everyone kind of loves it and everyone kind of hates it at the same time. Because it's obviously super disgusting if you're pushing for it. But some people got sick for the first time, and then they've learned and they know how to take their spin on this.
100%. It's brilliant way to train, great adaptations, just very hard. And if you're like to do true lactate training, you need to be like training at that 100% intensity for those time periods. And like for people who train when they're doing like interval type stuff, how often can you honestly say, like in those 30 to 60 second blasts, you're working at 100%? Like that's tough. That's rare. We do drop it into Metcon occasionally, you know, and
or like sustainable effort through the intervals.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So maintaining the kind of same pace. If you're doing 6 to 8 or 10 rounds, obviously you progress into more and more, but like you don't start at your peak and then you just coasting through the rest. Like sustainable effort, that's another thing like to focus on.
100%. Yeah,
because it's not about peak at the beginning and then just do whatever is left. Like that's not really the aim. Again, the adaptation. So small steps.
You don't want to be finished after a couple of pumps, do you?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's important. It can probably lead into sort of aerobic and maybe a little bit about interval stuff as well, like just in terms of how, simple ways of improving yourself through interval training, for example. So like, at MSC a lot, like if we're doing intervals, we'll be doing, maybe 30 seconds on, 90 seconds off. And then what we can do each week is reduce the recovery a little bit. That can be a really good way for like aerobic recovery work. So
I would add to it that like you can play with the ratios, and that's probably the ratios biggest key. Like work to rest ratio, and then you increase in the intervals. You will definitely be looking at the starting point of like less work, more rest, and then you're reducing exactly as you said. And then increasing the numbers, but like doing silly work that like where you work a long period of time and then you aiming to work hard and then you just get yourself a little bit of rest. The second round is not gonna be the same. So smart choices with the work to rest ratios, like 1 to 2 to begin with, maybe, and then occasional 2 to 1. Like there's obviously guidance for this and you can play with it, but again, really depends who the person is and where they stand. Like you wouldn't just give someone that suddenly 21 intervals of 6 on 54.
No, that's a good. Is it like the ratios is a better way of putting it, actually. So like that's you say, it might be like 1 to 4 to begin with. It might be like 20 on, 80 off, or something like that, and then like it might go 1 to 3, 1 to 2. And then, like you say, like you start going 2 to 1, and even further than that, and that's a good way of measuring. We can also measure through output in terms of that's like how sometimes we'll do the time patterns will be the same on week 2 as they will week 1 with some of our Metcon blocks, and we're just asking the guys to increase the output a little bit more.
Exactly. That's why I think like it's a good way if you actually looking to measure it is using actually like machines and like stuff which can show you how hard you're working.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So that's a great way. Because obviously not everyone should. I think everyone should sprint if we're talking sprint, but it's not obviously for everyone. Not everyone is ready to take on the demand, so it's maybe better not to.
Yeah.
And that's why it's good to do bike output on a skier.
Yeah.
So machines could be a good way to develop in speed, I think, as well, if you don't really want to do sprint, because people have dodgy hips. They're not that strong because they haven't done the amount of training they're supposed to. So
well, I think that's a good thing we can move on to here to sort of round it up. I think would be sort of types of of how to do the aerobic work and how to do the lactate and stuff, because I think like everybody should be doing some sort, ideally everybody in the world pretty much should be doing conditioning and should be doing some form of conditioning. Now, like the beauty of it is what we're looking to do is work the energy system, so the heart and lungs. So if whether that's going for a run or being on the bike or doing some weights at a certain tempo, can all be conditioning work.
Sure.
So like, do you know what I mean? Like, I think like, you hear people saying like, I just can't get fit because I can't run because I hurt my knee like a couple of years ago or something like that. And it's like, well, okay, you can use a ski erg, or you can probably get away with a rowing machine or bike, or you can maybe walking uphill or whatever it might be. So there's always a way around it. There's always an alternative, and it might just be personal preference as well. The amount of clients I've had over the years that for their cardio work, as they call it, like the conditioning, they'd say, oh yeah, but I want to do some strength work sometimes a week, but alongside that I'm running, but I really hate running. And I'm like, why are you running then? Why are you running? And they're like, oh, well, because you've got to run if you want to keep the weight off. And it's like, it's like, well, no, you don't. Yeah. Like there's other ways. So swimming, biking, walking, you name it. Like there's different ways of doing it. You could live a very long, fit, healthy life by never actually doing any of that and just doing like weight training. But once or twice a week in your weight training, you're doing more like almost circuit type work where you're working at a higher tempo and you're supersetting 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 exercises back to back, and therefore getting the heart rate up to a certain extent. I think
what you said about like how people say that like they, let's say, run, but they actually hate it. I think people should not be doing it. Like it's good to get out of your comfort zone, but like most people don't really know how to run, so they're like the biomechanics are terrible, and they're actually causing more damage to it.
Big time. Yeah.
Like the amount of people you see running, and it's really bad running. Like I think they must feel terrible after that. Like in terms of body.
You see people's gait, whenever, like without sounding horrible, like you see someone run past and you're like, wow, there's maybe running's great. Running's
great, but it has a lot of demand on the body.
Yeah, sure. It's impact as well. Even we talked about like sprinting impact, like jogging impact, if you're doing it at high volumes, is like hard.
And then the heavier you are, the worse.
Exactly. The heavier you are, the more alignment issues you have.
Yes, that's like when you start thinking of that on-feed and off-feed conditioning. Like there was something like I lately enjoyed running, but then I kind of couldn't do it that much, so I started using road bike a lot. Because I kind of needed that off-feed. So I still got that stimulus I wanted, but I'm just trying basically to say summarize what you said, that like find a way of doing what you want to do or get out of it. But if you hate running, like don't torture yourself out there for an hour. Most people who go for a run, they actually don't run a constant pace. They they run a little bit, then they walk. Like I see this a lot, let's say in Reservoir, like you sometimes see people running at like high speed, and I'm like, wow, that's impressive. Like I can't run that fast, but then you see them a couple of meters ahead and then they're walking. So they just doing random stuff basically. But again, then you can argue whether it's like they're doing something and it's good. But then it all depends on your goal, on what you want to get out of it. You might just feel good for it, going and trying, but then I think that's when people then plateau because it never gets anywhere. Because it doesn't have the structure, and that again comes up to that fact that you need to have some sort of program.
I think it's the same. Yeah, it's the same as weight training. That you need to have that structure and direction as to where you're going. Like I think that's a big mistake people make. It's like you've got there was the whole like count to 5K thing, and then there's like people putting the 5K times up and stuff in the lockdown, which is great. Loads of world records broken in that period by people who have never run before. But like it was good getting people up and getting them running and stuff. But I think there was a couple of programs going around which developed you from like nothing to 5K, which is great. That's like a progression of like, how do I get from nothing to that? So every time you're going for a run, you're doing different distances, different speeds, and then you reach the 5K. That's brilliant. So every time you're training, you're getting a new stress and stimulus and adaptation. But then like you get to the 5K and then people just stopped and they didn't like do anything after that. So I think like it's really important to like get some advice as to how to continue progressing and getting fitter. So like if you use that as a stepping stone to getting better at running, and you hit the 5K and then you're like, oh shit, what do I do now? Like one thing might be to go 6K, 7K, 8K, as high as you can, but then obviously that's got a shelf life. What you can do is like increase, the speed in which you're doing that run. There's lots of variables you can add to improve, but obviously, like you say, it's about knowing what the goal is, and what is the goal, and then starting from there. Really set the goal, scale it right back. Look at where you're at as a moment, and then be patient and set that plan in place, and then turn up and do it. That's the key, really, isn't it? So, I think we've probably covered a decent amount there for hopefully the listeners. And I think just to kind of round off a little bit, obviously we've had a good chat there about a bit more in depth about conditioning and when to work hard, when to work slower, on feet, off feet, lactate work, lactate, aerobic. So hopefully people have learned a couple of things from that and can take that forward. And just also, I think a big one to take away is having that structure where we're changing things a little bit week by week, so that we can work towards that goal and keep improving. I think that's
again, the answer for everything is that it depends.
Yeah, it's shocking.
Do I need to do that? Depends. How much
do I need to run? And it's do you play a sport that involves the need to run? Yes. Well, yeah, okay, you need to do some running. If you don't, then why are you running? Do you enjoy it? It might be the next question.
Exactly.
And it's no, I don't enjoy it. And it's stop running. Running is not good for you. If you don't need it for a sport but you enjoy running, then running is good for you. So we need to think of a way to make it so that we're then we might look into more depth and say, right, okay, if you've got a specific goal that you'd like to reach, and then work towards that. And if the answer is no, then okay, let's find another way of conditioning that can be fun for you. That might be watt bike, that might be working in a group environment, doing metcon type work like we do, metabolic conditioning, adding resistance into the conditioning work, which is obviously what we're big fans of. There we go. I think that's probably we can probably wrap that up there. Hope you've enjoyed the podcast, guys. Next time you're in MSC, have a look at the stash. I hope you like it all. And key dates for the diary, just a reminder, 30th of October, we have a Halloween special with our Metcon. And then we've got a social in the evening with a bit of fancy dress. Look forward to that one. And I think that's it from me.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks for listening. Thanks, Mark, for having me. And we'll see you again next week.
Ciao.